All right, let's keep it moving. We are on session number 7, top of page 20, the day you file. How to get your papers filed. How do you get your papers filed? What does that look like? Okay, bullet point, the first one is clerk's office. Clerk's office. The first sub bullet point says most likely is on the first floor of the courthouse. So most courthouses, again, the clerk's office where you file your papers is on the first floor. Know how much you have to pay and be prepared to pay all of the filing fees that day. Again, we talked about that earlier and where to find that information on their website. Know how you can make payment, whether it's credit card, cash, money order. Next one says, if it is a paperless courthouse, you probably won't need a cover sheet at the time that you file with the names of the parties, you and your husband, and indicating what type of case is being filed. Because if it's a paperless one, then when you're doing everything, doing your e-filing, they ask you all that stuff already. Okay, number 2 is you'll need to know how many copies you'll need when you arrive. And that will depend on whether you're able to file a hard copy or if you're required to e-file a hard copy. Okay, so if the last bullet point says, if it is an old school courthouse, you will probably need 4 copies plus the original. 4 copies plus the original. Page 21. Serving your husband. Serving your husband. Okay. First bullet point is citation. And we talked about that earlier, what that is. You're being sued. That's that document. It says the paper that officially tells your husband that you filed for divorce. Okay, and on the back of the citation is the return of service. Return of service. Remember we talked about service of process. The return of service is the document that will be filled out by the person who gives your husband the papers. Okay, so remember we said there's usually 3 options for that. Usually 3 options. So the next bullet point says service. Who to use? Who should you use? All right. A constable or sheriff, right? Let's talk about constable or sheriff. The constable option, okay, that's number 1. Number 2 says service will be arranged by the clerk at the time you file your papers. And double check that in the area that you live in. You can call the clerk's office and say, hey, when I go in there to file for divorce, can I, at that time, arrange for the constable or the sheriff to go ahead and, have my husband served? And we use Texas as an example. Absolutely, that's something that the clerk does. Usually, number 3 says usually slower service because they have a whole lot of people they need to serve. They try to map out, how they're going to do that. And they'll do that in accordance to how close or how far they have to drive. That's the way they kind of figure out how they're going to arrange the order of their documents that they have to serve. So that stuff takes time. And again, they usually have a whole lot of people they need to serve. So, it's kind of get in line type of thing. Number 4 says, it's usually more difficult to make special arrangements for service or to coordinate service. Again, because they're just trying to figure out the most efficient way to do things and, trying to figure out how far they need to drive and all that business. Page 22. Professional process server. Professional process server. Number 1, usually more expensive than using a sheriff or constable. Because some areas they don't have constables, in some areas they don't have sheriffs. So the next thing is you'll need to have to arrange for service. So in other words, if it's a private process server, usually the clerk doesn't do that for you. That's something that you arrange on your own. And so that means you would have to contact them, make payment, and get the papers to them, usually digitally. So You know, they'll have a copy that they give to you, or that they email you, depending on how the courthouse works. If it's a paperless courthouse, if not, even if you can go ahead and file a hard copy, you'll then have a copy that you'll get to the process server. Sometimes you'll mail it to them. Sometimes you'll scan it and email it to the process server. That's really what I would kind of recommend. And they usually have some way of doing some type of online secure online payment. Number 3 says, in some counties, the clerk's office will also have a list of approved process servers, but not always. I know some counties in Texas, they do have a list of approved process servers. They want to make sure, that the process server is properly licensed to do this. A lot of times, process servers are also private investigators, that type of thing. Or sometimes they are retired constables or sheriffs, and they are still collecting a pension and still doing a little bit of process serving on the side as a private process server, as a way of just to have some extra income. You can find a private process server. Number 4, yellow pages listings. The benefit of having a professional process server is it's easier to make special arrangements or coordinate service. I know sometimes some people, either say, my husband travels for work, and you may have to serve him at the airport. It's much easier to arrange to do that with a private process server than a constable or sheriff. They probably look at you like, really? As far as the constable or the sheriff, like, that ain't happening. So if you need to make special arrangements, you really want to go the way of using a private process server. Or say, for example, your husband works weird hours and he does swing shift, night shift, or sometimes a day shift. If they worked, in the medical field, something like that where it's difficult. Or, he may be a firefighter, and have a swing shift, or spend, days at a time away from the house. You want to make sure that you do that. Or again, they just may work odd hours for one reason or another. They may have the 4 to or 3 to 11 shift, or whatever it is. The next bullet point says, private individual only in some states. I do not recommend this. There are some states that will allow you to have a private individual hand the papers to your husband and expect them to fill out the return of service properly and then file it. Just don't do that. And it may be a little bit more expensive to have a private process server, or even to have the sheriff or the constable do it. And let me kind of give you an idea, at least in Texas, what the fees are for that. Okay, usually if you're going to use a constable or a sheriff, it's usually somewhere around $60 to $70 for them to serve your husband. And they usually do 3 tries. If they miss him once, they'll try 2 more times before they say, we couldn't serve him. But the private process server, again, usually it's 3 tries, but again, it's much easier for you to make special arrangements or make special requests to make sure that your ex gets served the first time, the first attempt, right? Okay. Now, the last major bullet point there says letter for server, whether it doesn't matter who you use, whether it's a constable, whether it's a sheriff, or a private process server. You want to have a letter for them ready to go the day you go to the courthouse to file your papers. So this is, again, something you're going to do way beforehand as you're gathering your stuff together and getting your mind all, set to go to the courthouse. You're going to have, that letter. If you need a temporary hearing, that letter that has the dates for your temporary hearing, and you're also going to have this letter for a process server. Okay? You're going to have any special instructions for the person who's going to be serving on the process server. Again, doesn't matter which one of the 3. Say, for example, if there's a certain type of day or location, or also giving the cell number. And so this is what, I usually used to do. Especially if there's kids involved, you want to make sure that your husband's still working, right? You don't want to threaten his job in any way. And so you really don't want him served at work. You don't necessarily want him served at home either, if you're there. So one of the things I did was I would make sure that the cell phone number was available for the process server, with a sheriff, constable, doesn't matter, private process server, and tell him, please call my ex. There is, a McDonald's that's, 2 blocks away from where he works. Please call him and ask him to meet you at the McDonald's or some other location that is nearby his job. Plan to do that around lunchtime. So you can tell the process server, my husband usually takes lunch at noon or at 11 o'clock, whatever it is. So you can call him just before then and tell him you have some papers for him. You don't want to serve him, walk through the door at his job. Please tell him to meet you. And a lot of the times the guy will, because he knows the only alternative is the process server is walking through, the door of where he works, and he doesn't want that. So you can do things like that to make it easier. Okay, and if you want it to be done, as soon as he gets to work or whatever it is, again, the day, the location, you can specify all of those things. And again, it's so much easier to do that with a private process server. So if you do have, again, special instructions that you want to use, just go ahead and pay. I'm sorry, and also usually I told you what the fees usually are, which is $65 to $70, $60 to $70 for the constable or sheriff. But a private process server can be anywhere from $80 to $125, $130, depending on how specific you want them to to be. If you want them to serve them at an airport or something like that, it's going to be closer to the higher range, $125, maybe $140, $50, depending on what you're asking that private process server to do. And letter B, the last point on page 22, have the letter typed up and ready to go before you get to the court, just in case you use the constable or a sheriff. So absolutely do that. Again, I know that was meaty. That was a whole lot of information. You're doing so good. There is a section on page 23 for you to write notes. So while this is still fresh in your mind, please make sure that you jot down some notes on page 23. Let's keep it going for session number 8.